everybody, and welcome to another Puppy School Q&A. My name's Nicole Harris, and this week I'll be talking about the topic of crate training. So thank you to everybody who posted a question on the Facebook group. I'll be answering those very shortly, but what I wanted to do to begin with was just to go through my top 5 tips for successful crate training, because it can be a little bit tricky, and these are the things I tend to find help the most. So the first thing, my big top tip, is to make sure that we do not leave our puppies to cry it out. So what I mean by that is when puppies first come home, the advice is often given that we should ignore them when they cry. So leave them to it, don't go down to them, because we don't want them to learn that crying gets our attention. Now, the problem with that is that when puppies first come home, the reason they're crying isn't because they are attention seeking. Those puppies are genuinely often quite distressed, unless the breeder has done a lot of work teaching the puppies to be on their own and teaching them to be comfortable in a crate. So these puppies have gone from an environment that they know very well. It smells familiar. They've got their mum, they've got their litter mates, they've got people around that they know. And all of a sudden we've taken them out of that environment, put them in a completely new environment, so a new home with new sounds, new smells, new people, sometimes new animals as well. And that can be quite traumatic for them. So the reason they cry, especially if they're left alone, if they're put down in a kitchen or a utility room or something, is that they're genuinely distressed about being on their own. So if we don't want them to cry, the best thing that we can do is actually make sure that they feel safe and secure. And the easiest way to do that is to make sure that someone is with them overnight. Now that can either mean that you sleep downstairs with them in the area that you want them to eventually sleep, or that you bring their sleeping area upstairs with you. That was my preference with my puppy. I like sleeping in my bed, so I chose to bring my puppy's crate up and sleep with her upstairs. And what that does is that just reduces their stress levels, because there's someone there, so it can just help them to sleep overnight. It reduces the crying. Also helps with house training, because I could hear when she got up and needed the loo. So it really helps with house training as well. But it just meant that we didn't get any crying overnight, because she wasn't distressed, because she wasn't on her own and it wasn't so scary. So that's my first top tip. My next top tip is to think about the size of your crate. So obviously when puppies are puppies, they're very small. And a small crate can be absolutely sufficient, but puppies grow. So we do need to think about what size crate we are going to provide for our puppies. Now, it might be that you just decide to increase the size of the crate as they get older, and that's perfectly fine to do. Whatever the size of your crate, it needs to be big enough that your puppy can stand up in it and do a full circle without crunching over and being hunched. Also have a think about how your puppy sleeps. So my puppy, when she was young, she used to sleep outstretched, so front legs and back legs outstretched, so her full length, which meant that by the time she got to about 4 or 5 months, her crate was actually too small for her, because she couldn't sleep like that in the crate. And I started to notice that when she'd come out in the morning, she'd have to do a real big stretch and she'd look really uncomfortable. So if your puppy doesn't sleep in a curl, in a little ball, and they like to sleep outstretched, then again you do have to think about the size of the crate that you're going to be providing for them to make sure it's the right size for them. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is to think about the location of your crate. So we talked earlier about making sure that we don't have puppies sort of maybe, especially in the first few weeks, being separated from you. So it might be that you bring the crate up to your bedroom so that they can sleep with you. If you do decide to have the crate downstairs and sleep next to them, that's absolutely fine, but do think about where you're going to put that crate. So I would avoid anywhere like a hallway, like a thoroughfare where you're going to get people coming through, because remember, the crate is potentially going to be their resting place, so you don't want it to be somewhere where it's very, very busy and lots of things going on. Kitchens can be a little bit difficult as well, because again, it's not the quietest place in the house quite often, so that can be a little bit difficult for puppies to sleep if there's lots of hustle and bustle going on. You do need to think about things like, so if you're going to use a puppy's crate in a utility room, you need to think about things like boilers. How much noise are they going to make? Is that going to disrupt their puppy's sleep? If you've got cats, have you got cats coming in and out of cat flaps that are going to wind puppy up while they're in their crate and potentially wake them up? And also thinking about temperature as well. So there are some rooms in the house that tend to get colder a little bit quicker than other rooms. Kitchens tend to be one of those types of rooms, or if you've got a conservatory or something like that and you're putting the puppy's crate in there. So have a little think about where you want your puppy's crate to be, and to make sure that they're not going to get too cold overnight, or too hot as well. That's another thing. So things like conservatories in the summer, we need to be really, really careful that puppy isn't getting too hot as well. The next of my top tips is to think about the length of time that your puppy is in their crate. It's really, really, really important that they are not in their crate for too long. Now that is going to depend on the puppy, but typically speaking, for very young puppies, we don't want them to be in their crate for any longer than they can hold their toileting. And for young puppies, that often isn't much more than an hour. So using a crate, especially if you're shutting a puppy in a crate, they can't really be left in that crate for any longer than 1 hour at a time. So that is something to think about as well. If you're going to be using a crate, can you make sure that you can get back to your puppy? I know it's a little bit easier now that a lot of us are in lockdown and we can be around, but if we're going to go back to work at any point, we need to make sure that we can let puppy out regularly, and give them access to somewhere to toilet, and obviously to get a little bit of a stretch. And the final one of my top tips is just to make sure that we don't just throw our puppies in the crate, not literally throw, but expect them to cope with it straight away. Like I say, some breeders will do some brilliant work and teach puppies to learn to enjoy being in their crate from a very, very young age. Some breeders don't do that, and that's absolutely fine, but that means that we need to do that training when we first bring our puppy home. So just popping them in a crate and then shutting the door, it's likely to create a little bit of a stress response in a puppy, especially if they're not particularly confident, which is quite common when they first come home. So we need to spend some time teaching them that being in the crate's really nice. And the way to do that to start with is with the crate door open, so they don't feel trapped and they don't feel restricted. So we'd have the crate doors open, maybe feed them their meals in there. You could give them some Kongs, some chews, play little games in there, scatter feed their food and get them to search around for their food in there. You basically just want them to learn that being in that crate means really nice things happen. And what starts to happen when they start to think, oh, this crate's a really nice place, they start to want to spend time in there on their own. So if your puppy isn't spending time in their crate of their own volition, that might mean that they're not totally relaxed in that crate and a little bit more work needs to be done there. Moving on from that little point, there's one thing that I tend to find can make crate training go a little bit sideways, and that is using food lures to get puppies to go into their crate. Now, I'm a big fan of food lures, and it's an excellent way to start a lot of training. So what you would do is pop a little treat under the puppy's nose, encourage them over to their crate, pop the treat in the crate, and then puppy goes in the crate and eats their treat. Now, if at that point you close the door behind them, they can become a little bit worried by that. And what can start to happen is the treats coming out can start to, in their mind, mean, oh, something bad's going to happen, I'm going to get trapped. So you can actually accidentally poison your treats. So what I mean by that is teaching puppy that treats don't mean anything good. Treats actually mean that you're going to get trapped. So although it's okay to start off teaching puppies to go in their crate by popping little treats in there, what we eventually want to build up to is teaching our puppy to go in on their own. And then when they choose to go in, the treats appear afterwards. So puppy goes in, treats appear. So it's not that you're luring them in, that it's they're choosing to go in because they think, oh, something good's going to happen. So they've got that really positive emotional association, and then some nice treats appear, and we can start to build up with that. So if you find that your puppy will only go in a crate because you've got a treat under their nose and you're showing it to them and you're throwing it in, and that's the only time your puppy will go in their crate, what that might mean is that the puppy really likes food, doesn't actually really like their crate. So the next stage is to teach them to go into their crate on some sort of cue, whether you say in your crate or point into the crate. When they go in, that's when the treats appear, not before. Now, that's something that might take a little bit of time and a little bit of training, and there's a little bit of a knack to it. So if you do need any help with that, that's something potentially to get in touch with your local puppy school tutor so they can give you some hints and tips on how to do that successfully. So those are my top 5 tips. So like I say, don't leave them to cry when they are, especially in the first sort of few weeks, because they're going to be genuinely distressed. Think about the size of your crate. So you want it to be big enough that they can turn around and comfortably sleep in it. Think about the location of your crate. It's not somewhere that's too busy. It's somewhere that's nice and quiet, and it's not going to be somewhere where they're going to get uncomfortable temperature-wise. Think about the time that they are in it, not too long. And for very young puppies, no more than about an hour. And making sure that we are teaching them to enjoy spending time in their crate. So it's worth putting the effort in initially, so that when they're a little bit older, they are comfortable in that crate. If the initial experiences in that crate are very negative, it can mean that we end up with a puppy or an older dog that just says, I don't like being in that crate and I don't want to go in there. So we want to keep those as positive as possible. So those are my top 5 tips. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the questions and hopefully we can get some answers for you, and then hopefully we can give you some hints and tips. So, okay, so our first question is from Sinead Loader, who says, our 6-month spaniel has been great in the crate for months, not a peep all night until morning. Suddenly in the last couple of weeks, every third night or so has started barking and scrabbling when we cover her and go upstairs. We've been to check and let her out briefly in case she needs the toilet, but she just comes straight back in and either tries to play or sits on the sofa. We tried ignoring, but she can keep it up to 20-30 minutes before she settles. What's the best thing to do? So there's a few things that could be going on there, Sinead, but I suspect it might just be that. So she definitely doesn't need the toilet. So that's the first thing. You mentioned that she comes straight back in. So does that mean that you haven't gone out with her? So I'm going to refer you back to the house training video as well. Sometimes puppies won't toilet unless you're out there with them. So that might be a situation where she does need the loo potentially, but it's worthwhile going out with her just to make sure she does her business before she comes back in, and that will help her to settle a little bit. But if it's definitely not a toilet training thing, when she's coming in, obviously she's quite hyper by the sounds of things. She's active and wants stuff to do, and it can take 20 or 30 minutes before she settles. So my suggestion there would be maybe it's worthwhile just starting your nighttime routine a little bit earlier, just so that she starts to wind down. If we've got a big sort of difference between, you know, we're active and we're doing stuff and then all of a sudden we go to bed, it can take puppies a little bit of time just to wind down. So it might be that you just need to help her to settle a little bit earlier. The other thing that can happen is if she's sleeping all evening, or she's resting all evening, and then you'll get into the nighttime when you want her to go to sleep, then she's awake again. So again, you might need to just look at your routine a little bit. So if she's doing a lot of resting throughout the evening, and then when you're trying to get her to go to bed, that's when she's active, it just means you probably need to get her doing a little bit of activity a little bit earlier so that she wants to sleep when you want her to go to sleep. Or if like I say, she's just, you know, getting really active, you might just have to start your nighttime routine a little bit earlier so she's starting to settle and get used to the idea. So like you say, she's taking about 20 to 30 minutes to settle. So that might mean you need to start your nighttime routine 20 to 30 minutes a little bit earlier. So hopefully that gives you some things to think about and to try. Steph Maurice has asked, we live in a 2-story house. Do we need 2 crates or move it upstairs when we go to bed? Should the puppy sleep in a crate in our room when she comes home? Thanks. So hopefully the second part of that question has been answered in the beginning part, my top tips. So yes, absolutely. Puppy needs to sleep near you. So whether that's a crate in your room or whether that's you sleeping downstairs, it doesn't matter. But the important thing is that you are there, just your presence, so that they feel nice and relaxed. So it doesn't matter, like I say, whether that's in your room or not. That is your choice. I personally decided to have my puppy in my room because I like to sleep in my bed. I didn't want to sleep on the floor downstairs. But different people are happy to do different things. Do you need 2 crates? Well, It's entirely up to you again. The benefit of having 2 crates is you don't have to lug them up and down the stairs every single day. So that's a bonus. But if you do have a puppy and you do have 2 separate crates and you want to spend time in 2 separate areas, then just remember that when it comes to training, puppies aren't very good at generalizing. So what that means is they're not very good at learning that what applies in one specific situation also applies in another specific situation. So if you're going to teach your puppy to have 2 separate crates, then you're probably going to have to do a little bit of crate training in both areas and teaching them that both places are good places to be. So feeding meals in both little crates, playing games in both little crates, and just doing all that stuff I was talking about earlier, building those positive associations in both separate areas. So that's my little top tip for you. But with regards to whether you have 2 crates or not, again, I think that's personal preference and it's entirely up to you. If you've got 1, you'll just have to lug it up and down. If you've got 2, you don't have to lug it up and down. I think that would be my preference, but everybody each their own. So Zoe Lamerton, we have just started to crate train our new lab puppy. All well so far. Excellent. Presently, he's in a medium-sized crate, as we had already, but he's filling it fast at 10 weeks. We will need to get a larger one soon. How do we introduce the bigger crate and when? Shall we go straight to a large crate for his adult size, or will that feel too big for him? So again, I think that's probably a little bit of personal preference with regards to the size of the crate you want. If you can go to a big crate and you've got the space for that, fantastic. The only thing I would say about having a very big crate with a very small puppy to start with is when it comes to house training, the reason crates can be really, really useful for house training is because puppies typically do not want to toilet on their bed area. So if they're in a smallish, or obviously the appropriate sized crate, but a small crate area, what happens is when they wake up in the middle of the night, they need the loo, they can't get away from their bed area. So that's why they're likely to cry and say, hello, can someone come and let me out, so that they can go and toilet. So that's how you can encourage toilet training and getting them to ask to be taken out, because they are restricted to their little bed area and they need to cry to let you know that they want to be let out to go to the loo. If they've got a big crate, there's nothing stopping them from waking up in the middle of the night and thinking, oh, I really need the loo. Well, I'll just toddle off to the other side of my crate and toilet there. So I do think that if you use too big a crate too early, you can end up going backwards with your house training, because it gives them an opportunity to toilet in their crate just because it's so big. So if your puppy is already cracking with the house training, then you might decide to move on to the big crate straight away. But if the house training hasn't quite got there yet, you might just have to have a little consideration about slowly increasing the size of the crate. So it does depend on the situation there, but hopefully that helps you a little bit, Zoe. Lamorna Hollingsworth, what's the best way of using the crate during the day with a brand new puppy, with a small penned off area and the crate door open? Right, lovely question, Lamorna. Yes, absolutely my preference, rather than just having a puppy in a crate, because that is a very, very, very small space. The absolute preference would be a playpen set up somewhere. So that's their area where they can mooch about and they can, run about if they need to and play with their toys and do all those sorts of things, with a crate inside with the door open. So certainly in the initial stages of crate training, because we don't necessarily just want to shut the door on them, having that set up is a really nice way to be sure that puppy has got somewhere safe and secure to be, because obviously the playpen prevents them from getting access to the wires behind the TV, the skirting boards, all those things that we don't want them to have access to. It means that we don't have to pay attention to our puppy 100% all the time. We know that they're safe in there, but it also means that we're not shutting them away somewhere which might stress them out a little bit too early, too soon, before we've done any crate training. And again, because we've talked about this idea that puppies, very young puppies particularly, shouldn't be in a crate for too long, any more than about an hour, the playpen setup is a really nice way to get around that, because it means that they've got a bigger area to explore. It means you can safeguard the areas of your house that you really don't want them to have access to. They've still got their little crate area there as a nice little safe space to go to if they want to. But if they don't want to be in their crate, then they've got somewhere that they can go to and move about as well. So I really like that as a way of introducing a puppy to a crate and having them safe to start with. So our final question, again, from Zoe Lamerton. What's a good method to get them back into their crate at night if they wake up and have to go to the loo? So this is a really, really common question. Because what happens is they wake up, they need the loo, we take them outside, and then all of a sudden we've got a puppy that's gone absolutely balmy and has started to do zoomies around the house. So my top tips for that: the first thing is to make sure that we are not making the going out to the loo a big deal. So you kind of want to be as calm and as quiet as you can. What I would suggest is if you've got a puppy in their crate, you just want to unhook their crate very calmly and quietly. Gently guide your puppy to the outside. You don't want to be making a massive fuss of them, so try not to talk to them too much, try not to fuss them too much. Just very quietly opening the back door, going out in the garden with them, keeping it very low key. If they toilet outside, again, a little bit of praise is absolutely fine, but don't go nuts about it. Bringing them back in, and then again encouraging them back into their crate. We talked earlier about the importance of not throwing a treat in and then just shutting them in. So hopefully we've done a little bit of training beforehand to make sure that they understand that going into their crate leads to something nice afterwards. Some puppies can take a little bit of time to then settle back down. So you might have to just sit with them until they just go back and start to settle and drift off again. It's a bit like us. Sometimes I get it quite often, you know, if I get up in the middle of the night, I don't necessarily fall back to sleep straight away. Sometimes it takes me a little bit of time, and puppies are the same. So if they don't fall asleep straight away, that's perfectly normal, but you might just have to sit with them just very calmly and quietly until they drift off again. But if you have got a puppy who's not totally relaxed in their crate, that will make that more tricky. So again, if you've got a puppy that's struggling to spend time in their crate, that would be another really good reason for bringing the crate either up into the bedroom with you or for you to sleep downstairs with them, so that you can take them out to the toilet, pop them back in their crate again, and then you're still there so they don't have to worry and stress about it. The only other thing I would mention with that, Zoe, is if you've got a puppy that is toileting in the middle of the night, you don't mention how old your puppy is, I don't think. Did you mention in the previous? Oh, no, you did say 10 weeks. So we've still got a very, very, very young puppy there. So actually toileting overnight is quite normal because they've got very, very, very small bladders. As they start to get older, what you can start to do is just maybe have a little think about what time you're feeding them, just so that if that's having an impact on when they need to go to the toilet, you might have to feed them a little bit later so that they can hold themselves all the way through the night, and then that means that you're not having to wake up and go through all of that in the middle of the night. So you might just have to have a little think about routine there as well. So hopefully that helps you a little bit as well, Zoe. So those were all the questions this week. Hopefully that's answered your questions, but if any of you have got any further questions for me, please do pop them in the comments below. If anybody else has got any questions about crate training, again, please do pop them in the comments below. Thank you very, very much for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next week for our next Q&A. Thank you very much. Bye.